We are kicking off a new series today. Finally, we're to a point in a year where I'm starting to believe that we won't have another snowstorm. Is anybody else skeptical? They were like, we got at least one more. There's got to be one. My last year that I was in seminary, lived in Minnesota, it snowed on May 1st. And I remember I was walking out of the church that I interned at the time, and I went and I sat down in my car, and I remember big flakes started to fall, and I was like, and I remember yelling no, as if like anyone was listening. I was like, no, that's not allowed. But I'm looking at the forecast, it's like, looks pretty nice. I'm like, okay, we're finally to spring, right? And I've shared this before, but I really like new seasons. I like new stages of things. I like entering kind of this thing that feels fresh. I'm one of those people who liked the first day of school. I didn't, just the other days, you can have them, but the first day where nobody really knew where they were going, there was kind of this easy set of expectations around everywhere. Man, it's just a great thing to feel like there's possibility, like there's opportunity. And spring, in my view, always seems to start with the celebration of Easter. Like no matter where Easter falls during the year, whether it's super early like it was this year, whenever Easter, the holiday happens, the celebration of Jesus' resurrection, that's kind of when it starts. And it always seems like the truth of Easter and what spring offers us is perfectly timed. Just as we start to hear about the life-changing, world-altering actions of Jesus regarding God's grace, giving us this fresh new chance on life because Christ defeated sin and death. At the same time, outside is starting to warm up and show signs of life. Those geese that live in our parking lot come back. One likes to stand on the middle cross, like on the top of it, and I've named him Goose Jesus, which might sound sacrilegious, probably because it is. But I see the geese come back, and I know that it's spring. We start to see you start to see flowers come back. You start to wonder if you should actually mow your lawn again. Anybody still holding out? Yeah, I am. Yeah, they said we're not supposed to mow in May for the bees, right? Isn't it for the bees or something? I was like, yeah, I love the bees. Sure. So the Applebee's. So, in thinking about ways to jump back into Scripture for a Men of Hope series, we've done a couple of topical studies, and I was like, how can we kind of, as we enter this new season, how can we orient ourselves in Scripture? How can we kind of dive into some Bible stories that have to do with kind of where we're at in this year? And I think it would be seasonally appropriate here to talk about exactly this: fresh, resurrected life. Because whether or not you're in a good season of life, whether you are in a really challenging one, because I know we got guys who are really going through it, right? Or maybe you're somewhere in between, we all could use some fresh, resurrected life somewhere along the way. So each week we're going to be talking about a different story each week about new life and how that new life was brought about by the encountering of God. And the thing is that there's a lot of different ways that you need new life. Maybe you need better health, right? Maybe you literally need more life from a physical sense. Well, Jesus raised people from the dead, so that is one thing, right? Maybe you need a fuller life, being more of the person that God made you to be. Jesus did that for a lot of people too. So we're going to talk about all of these different ways that this can look. Not an exhaustive list, of course, but we're going to start the series this week with a story that was mentioned at Easter during a skit where some pastors and ministers did some acting. One pastor was very questionable. It was me. Man, he's throwing shade at Justin Stofa. No, Stofa's great. We did this skit in where there were several different Bible stories mentioned, and Easter is a really good place to start, considering we've just finished it, even if it was super early this year. Side note: did you know Easter, if it was next year, would have been last weekend? This year it was like March 31st or something. Next year it's April 20th. And we hear all the time, well, astrology and all of that's from the devil. And it's like, well, it certainly can be. But guess how Easter is decided? The moon. Yeah. So because the moon apparently was early this year, again, I don't know how it goes. I just ask Google, and Google tells me when Easter is this year. And Jesus told Google. So we're going to start with this Easter story that was mentioned. It kind of has to do with the disciples after all of the hubbub of Easter. And we're going to talk about this guy, Peter. And at the point that I'm suggesting for our point at Peter now, I'm going to also try to convince us of this point. And this is kind of a guiding thing for the rest of our series as well. Jesus' resurrection means new life for us. Jesus' resurrection, this other guy coming to life, also means new life for us. So maybe I think many of you, I saw many of you at one of the many Easter services that we have. Baked into these big holidays is this certain level of excitement. This is true outside of Hope as well, but here at Hope in this building, we go all out in trying to throw the biggest party that we can. And the reason is not to put on some big performance or some big show. It's not so that we can tell you that tens of thousands of people showed up for Easter and all those types of things. Instead, we go all out in order to highlight just how important this day is. We go all out to show you that this, for us, is one of the very most important days of the year. And to highlight what exactly we're celebrating. And from Maundy Thursday, the beginning of Holy Week, all the way through the last service on Easter Sunday, we had roughly 4,327 services, approximately. Obviously kidding, but it was a lot, right? And various rooms were filled with people from all over, where we had music, we had great teaching, etc. It was a good time. So it's all good, right? After that, coming out of it, it's a new, fresh start, new life, fresh hope. He is risen indeed. We're all excited, and we all go about our lives, right? But this is not exactly an Easter sermon that I'm giving here today. It's helpful to give an after Easter sermon as well. I've said this similar thing for Christmas, because sometimes we can treat these big holidays like some sort of vitamin. We're like, oh, I did it. Now I'm healthy. That is not how vitamins work, right? Or you go work out one time and you're like, yes, finally have the body I've always wanted. No, it's the beginning stages of something. This is true for each service, that we don't want to use it as some sort of arrival and then kind of depart from it for the rest of the week. But it's especially so for Easter. I talk about this pretty frequently, but I think Easter is the perfect example. There's a pitfall that happens after a big Sunday like Easter, and it threatens the fresh start that we can experience. It turns out that sometimes a big, fresh start can be something that's more difficult than we think that it is. Sometimes we treat the good news of Easter, another metaphor would be like a Red Bull, right? You've seen those Red Bull commercials where they drink the Red Bull and then the cartoon grows wings and then he flies away, right? Like they drink the Red Bull and then their problem is solved and they're able to escape. If you came to church expecting that to be your experience just from Easter, the tricky part with making it such a big deal is you feel really great leaving Easter. You feel really psyched up. You're like, yes, God is alive, and I am, all of these things. You're feeling really spiritually filled up. But the problem is, and make no mistake, like transformation is absolutely the name of the game with God. But I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that it's easy. It's as if focusing on God instead of focusing on whatever coping mechanisms you've had your whole life is some sort of easily transferable thing, right? If you reach the point where you're like, man, I really do want to make some changes in my life, and God is, I recognize Jesus died for me. Maybe this is something that you've realized in a new and fresh way, and you're feeling really excited about it. But the problem is that we all got a past. Problem is that we've been living the rest of the time. However old you are, that's how many years you've had to program in stuff that isn't the stuff that's going to get you to life, right? You can come out excited and positive for the possibilities of what was before, but the challenge that's before us is this. Regardless of the fresh start that wrong way. Regardless of the fresh start that we're given, we're all coming with baggage. And that is just a truth of the reality. And the point is not to ignore it specifically. The important thing is to recognize that God is working in that to bring us out of it. But if we just pretend that it doesn't exist, it will indeed sneak up on us, right? We all come with a past, regardless of what opportunities we're given, new places we move, new jobs that we get, new friends that we make. There isn't anything that vanishes from our past timelines simply because we want to follow Jesus. Even in a life-changing reality like the fresh life afforded to us by Easter, it doesn't magically erase the actions of our past. As you heard from the people that were gracious enough to share their story during our Men of Hope stories, that series that we just finished up, there are guys saying, listen, this was my past. This is what I was in the middle of. And not just stuff like sometimes we stereotype stories that happen at churches. People were like, while I was, in a particular circumstance where I was this terrible person and then now I'm this great person, right? If we were to make a stereotype, that's what it would be. But the truth is that even if it was something that happened to you and not necessarily through you, there's a lot of stuff that still affects our daily mental space. There's a lot of things that we've gone through in the past. Maybe you've lost a child. I know that's plenty of people's stories here. Maybe you've endured illness. Maybe it's not the circumstance where you were some angry, terrible person. Maybe you were just hurt. And that's still something that walks with you. And the threat is that you start to believe that all of this Jesus stuff isn't true when that rears its ugly head again. But if we don't properly deal with the things that we're struggling with, then we just trying to brush past it just to try to plug our ears and say Jesus has got it. Well, Jesus wants to help you heal it. Jesus isn't here to help you ignore it. Jesus, whether or not you knew it, Jesus was the Lord of your life then too, right? Jesus isn't just saying, I guess we can just pick up where we've left off here. The thing that I have a name for this thing that exists, right? I have a name for this thing that exists where we feel really good and then we get kind of thrown back into our own rhythm. And then all of a sudden we feel like maybe everything is just a bunch of hooey, right? I have a name for it. The name for this thing is called Monday. Right? Like Monday is a really dangerous day. There's this thing called the Sunday Scaries, where you start to maybe you're done with church, maybe you're done with you get home, you start to see that to-do list. Your phone, if you set on your Outlook calendar if you have a certain setting, it starts to remind you about meetings you have the next day. I'm like, I don't need that now, Outlook, right? It's not called anything else special because it's not, and that's why it's so dangerous to faith. Because inherent to this big, beautiful new life we experience with the Holy Spirit in special holidays like this is this idea that everything is new now because Easter did change everything. But when Monday comes, the problem is it looks a lot like all the other Mondays. And it's easy once the emotional high comes down from awesome music and speaking. Because things are still difficult, maybe that it all wasn't real or it all didn't take or some sort of faulty understanding like that. We can feel foolish for the hope that we had just moments before. And it's in this place that we find our friend Peter today. Peter was Jesus' main man. They called him the rock, right, of his kingdom. And after Jesus dies, he went back to what he knew. He was a fisherman. And Simon Peter, he was just Simon. He went from this one identity of being the rock back to the old identity. He had a bad day, and technically Jesus had a really bad day, and but Peter's whole life came crashing down as well. This person that he was following all of a sudden had perished. This guy that he thought was going to take over the kingdom and usher in a new era of God, all of a sudden was just murdered. So he went back to what he knew. Peter was the leader of the group. He was really outspoken. If you find somebody leading the disciples and doing something foolish, typically Peter is the one that is there. And I've had people ask me before. I was talking about this at breakfast. People ask, well, why was Peter the boss? What about him made him? What about him sort of put him in this position? It's been suggested by historians. Maybe he was the oldest. He could have been like 19. Right? Or he could have been in his 20s as well, but the point is that many of these disciples are so much younger than we want to think that they are. And Peter was likely one of the older ones, maybe more established. And so here's this boisterous, outspoken person who's done everything, and is the person who pointed to Jesus first and said, you know who I say you are? I say you're the one who's going to save us all. And then Jesus dies. And Peter denies him 3 times, a terrible moment for him. So he personally has failed. He feels maybe a little bit betrayed by this person that he thought was God, and then all of a sudden is killed. He doesn't quite sure what he believes. And so I think that the important thing that sometimes we miss about what happened after Good Friday was that Peter went back to what he knew. Peter had his whole experience following Jesus was Sunday, but here we find him on a Monday. Here we find him on a day that looked just like every other day, where he was still bad at the same things he was still bad at. He was bad at before with fishing. Maybe there's something maybe there was a certain part of that job he didn't love. Maybe there was a certain rhythm to it that he never felt fully fulfilled by, and all of a sudden he finds himself in that same exact place again, wondering if all of it's true. But then Jesus is resurrected, right? And shows up on a beach. And Peter, who felt heartbroken and probably a little silly that he thought that something could be different, I don't know, maybe that's you if you've ever experienced that, where something comes back to bite you that it had before, whether that's addiction, whether that's an old habit or a hang-up, or maybe it's even just having some doubts that rear their head again, and you go, you know what? It's silly to think that anything could have been different. But the story that we're jumping into is that Jesus shows up on a beach. And it's important to note that Peter is so excited because this means that all of those things that he was facing no longer held precedence. All of those, his life really was changing, and that actually it was even more than he could have ever imagined. Peter jumps out of the boat to try to get to the water faster, which if you've ever been in water, you know is silly, right? If you're in a boat, you can move faster than somebody who is swimming. And I say that partially as a joke because it's funny to imagine Peter jumping out and then like trying to swim, and the disciples are just like right next to him. There's like, it's just like kind of awkward. But I think that the important thing that we could potentially miss is that he was just so overjoyed that he didn't want space between him and Jesus again. He wanted to go meet his friend that he thought was dead. And so he's excited to see Jesus. He gets over there, and Jesus makes them breakfast. See, our kitchen team is holy, following in the footsteps. But while they're eating breakfast, they talk. And that leads us to our Bible passage for today. It's John chapter 21. Because remember, Peter had betrayed Jesus 3 times. There's some awkwardness that they need to address, right? So John chapter 21, we're going to start in verse 15. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, Peter replied. You know I love you. Then feed my lambs, Jesus told him. Jesus repeated the questions. Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter said. You know that I love you. Then take care of my sheep, Jesus said. A third time he asked him, Jesus asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was hurt. He was offended at this. He thought he was kind of punishing him for the denial that he had. Peter didn't quite get it yet. And he was hurt that Jesus asked him a question a third time. Maybe he didn't hear the first time, and so he asked the second time. But now he knew it was intentional, and it seemed mean. Peter said, Lord, you know everything. You were raised from the dead. Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Which is the line that breaks my heart because you know that that's true. He's like, I know that I am talking to God. You don't have to ask me. You know that I love you. Jesus said, then feed my sheep. I tell you the truth. When you were young, you were able to do as you liked. You dressed yourself and went wherever you wanted to go. When you're old, you'll stretch out your hands and the others will dress you and take you where you don't want to go. Jesus said this to let him know by what kind of death he would glorify God. Then Jesus told him, follow me. Jesus told him, follow me. That's how he ends the statement. And the crazy thing is, and we don't know this for sure because it doesn't say exactly where they were, but remember what Jesus said to Peter when he invited him to be his disciple. He said, follow me. It was likely in the same spot that they were fishing now. He would have gone back to what he knew. So there, in the same spot of Peter's old life, where Peter was like, this whole thing is probably a bunch of nonsense. I shouldn't have gotten my hopes up, and this whole faith thing just isn't for me. He went back to his old life, and Jesus shows up in the same spot twice. Shows up, makes him breakfast, asks him 3 times, the same amount of times that he denied Jesus, and gives him a charge out of that question. He's like, you know that I love you. He said, great, now here's your charge. And then ends it with the fresh invitation to follow me. That is, he's being given a fresh start. He's being given new life. Jesus' resurrection means new life for us. Not just continuing on with the same brokenness as before, something new. Notice that Peter's fresh start doesn't undo what he did. Notice that it doesn't mean that what Peter did isn't unimportant, right? Jesus didn't become unbetrayed. Jesus is just showing that the new life that he's giving Peter is infinitely more important than the old life that Peter squandered. Let me say that again. The new life that Peter is receiving from Jesus is infinitely more important than whatever has come before. Doesn't mean that his mistakes didn't hurt people. Doesn't mean that the things that he did didn't matter. It just means that where Jesus is leading us is more important than all of that. It's certainly true for us as well. In our second guessing, in our attempt to not have to confront the past, we'd much just rather ignore it, we tend to do something unhelpful. We go, okay, I get it now. Easter made me feel really good, and my past made me feel really bad. So I just have to stay in this place where I'm psyched for God all the time, right? If I can just listen to the right music, if I can just stay on the spiritual high, I can just, listen to sermons nonstop, and I can read all the devotionals in the world, and I can buy all the T-shirts, and I can make sure that I only listen, I'm a musical person, so I bring it up multiple times, but I can make sure that I'm only listening to one particular type of thing, and I can just make sure that I'm always ingesting spiritual content, and then I'll be able to stay in the place where I don't have to think about who I was before all of this. We all go through a version of this, right? Maybe that's an extreme, but in a world of content and of a place where you can get media and information anywhere in the world, maybe this affects some of us more than people in the past. Resurrection isn't as important for Easter as it is for every single day after Easter. It is incredible the day that Jesus came back from the dead. But it is, Jesus did it for now. Jesus did it for us today so that so that we can live the life that God's given us, not just so we can hit the escape hatch someday and know where we're going. Jesus was resurrected for now. Easter is about every other day, every other mundane moment, every other situation. It doesn't mean that we won't have to deal with our actions, but it does change the outcome. It does change what those things mean about us. It means that whatever you are dealing with, there's new life on the other side of it. Jesus had to be resurrected to show us that there is more than just being forgiven for the things that we've done. Resurrection shows us that there is life afterwards. You hear me? Jesus could have just said, hey, guess what? I'm going to die, and that's going to atone for everything, and so don't worry about when you die. It's really important that he came back, because after the death that we've experienced, there's life afterwards. That's going to be true for the rest of our series as well, but it's really important for Peter. Maybe you find yourself in a situation where you're really in need of some new, fresh life. And I would say for Peter, what that is spiritual. He was thinking that he was fooled by all this. And I know maybe you think I'm preaching to the choir because you're all here early on a Wednesday morning, but maybe you are somebody who is in need of some spiritual renewal. Maybe you are in the middle of something that is really a challenge to your spirit, and you're just wondering if you've fooled yourself. But really, the important thing is that Jesus' resurrection means new life for us, because just like Peter, Jesus meets us in the middle of where we're at and says, hey, let's go somewhere else. Follow me. Feed my sheep. Let's see where I'm leading next. Amen? Our discussion questions, and I should have just put question, well, technically it's two, but operating around the same idea, where would you like some resurrection in your life? This doesn't have to be your deepest, darkest secret. I'm saying, where could you use some fresh new life? Maybe work really needs some fresh new life for you. Maybe some motivation for work. Maybe it's a thing where you're like, man, I used to have passion in my life, but maybe that some of that's dwindled a little bit. Maybe you need some direction. Maybe you need some purpose. Maybe you need to dream again. There's somebody who's like, yeah, I used to want to do so many different things, but now it's just all kind of whatever. Where do you need resurrection in your life? Where are you looking forward to fresh life this new season? What's on the horizon for you? Another way to say this would be, where is God leading? Do you feel like there's an opportunity for you to step into something this year? If the answer is no, that's totally fine. It's really important to acknowledge where we're at, right? What is something that's going to give you joy? What is something that could potentially give you purpose in this next season? And if the answer is nothing, then notice that, and see where the invitations might be this week. Sound good? Grace and peace, friends. Go be good to each other. We'll see you next week.